addiction is sick. Any of you still stuck in the idea that you just were, I behaved bad, I made bad decisions? Yeah. Insane people are characterized by making bad decisions. They don't seem bad to the insane. How many of you don't believe you're insane when you're in your addiction? See, you were insane before you activated your addiction. If you knew yourself to be an addict and you had clean time and then you used again, there was nothing more insane you ever did than that. Okay, so now some promise. Life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. Why did they describe that as an experience? So you guys get what they're talking about? They would, if they had meant to see, they would have said, this is a sight you must not miss. How many of you have walked in a room full of people you didn't know, but the minute you started interacting with them, you could feel that you knew? Okay. That later they'll talk to us, welcome us to the fellowship of the Spirit. It's tangible. Yes? Okay. All right, so we know you'll not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. Perhaps you're not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. You think that's true for you? How many of you have met people who do not want to recover in places you thought it was odd to find them? If Sean brings up a point, have you met people in the rooms of AA who seemingly don't want to recover? I've heard people declare in rooms of AA, we don't recover here. We're always recovering. Okay. Not my experience, but I'm allowed to let you have yours. The reason I call that to your attention, they said recovered 17 times in the instruction of the steps. Yes. And when they wrote this book, alcoholism was not a medical diagnosis. So they clearly weren't talking about a medical recovery anyway. They were talking about a life recovery. It's a mining term, not a medical term, to be redeemed, to take from what was thought waste and extract something infinitely valuable. Any of you discovered a valuable experience as you armed yourself with the facts about yourself? So you can easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, or hospitals. They'll be only too glad to assist you. Don't start out as an evangelist or reformer. What's that look like? Y'all pointing at me, huh? We're assuming you came here of your own volition, right? So the evangelist is somebody who's waving the book, and the reformer's telling you about the evils of drink. And how did they know not to start out that way? Because we all fucking start out that way. And this is a book of experience. It's not as effective as we think, right? The chemicals are far more persuasive forces than we are. Okay. So unfortunately, a lot of prejudice exists. You'll be handicapped if you arouse it. Ministers and doctors are competent, but you can learn much from them if you wish. But it happens that because of your own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics. Why can I be uniquely useful to another alcoholic? Because I'm an example of a recovered life, and a seemingly impossible situation stands before them, just like what happened to Bill when Ebby came in. He knew Ebby to be worse than him, but there he sat. There sat a miracle right across the table from me. He shouted great tidings, right? But I'm not uniquely useful to you if all I know is my drinking history. The only thing that's important to you is that I encountered a power called God who pulled me from that wretched state to a place where I no longer suffer from the bondage of addiction, and that power sent me here to see you. And on and on and on it goes. Okay. So cooperate, never criticize, to be helpful is our only aim. When you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about him. How do we do that? Yeah, talk to him and listen about 2 or 3 times as much as we talk, right? Gotcha. It says if he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade him. Why not? Who's the persuader? Alcohol is a great persuader. Beat us into a state of reasonableness. That's what they said. So the reason why I want to do that is we may spoil a later opportunity. How many of you had to be convinced that you needed help when you knew you needed help? Not one of us. When we knew we needed help, we were reasonable. Sometimes dead is reasonable, right? I had a guy tell me, get to God or get to God. Take one. Okay. This advice is given for his family also. They should be patient, realizing they're dealing with a sick person. I'm going to jump from some of that because I'm not going to talk about working with the family so much tonight, but just talking about us working with the still sick and suffering or somebody that's struggling in sobriety, maintaining sobriety. So I'm going to go over to page 91. We normally, when we first come around especially, we're going to meet them in our meetings, in our fellowship. And so we're going to talk about what that looks like. So middle of that page 91, it says, see your man alone if possible. So how many of you, Sean always talks about his kidnapping techniques. How many of you have found that it's sometimes difficult to get your prospect alone when you meet him at the hall? So how do you do it? Meeting after the meeting, meeting before the meeting, that kind of thing? Okay. At first, engage in general conversation. So what's that conversation look like? Hey, how's it going? How are you? Haven't seen you here before. Huh? What do they usually hear when they come into our rooms? Read the first 164 pages. You got a sponsor yet? Don't know shit about them. They just came in to pee, right? After a while, turn the talk to some phase of drinking. Tell him enough about your drinking habits, symptoms, and experiences to encourage him to speak of himself. Where did we learn to talk about our drinking habits, symptoms, and experiences? Probably someone helped us with the step experience, and we learned what we were like, what happened, and they can see what I'm like now. Right? Okay. So if he wishes to talk, let him do so. You'll thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. If he's not communicative, give him a sketch of your drinking career up to the time you quit, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. Why do they caution us about that? Yeah, you can. But how many of us, if we're honest, you people, how many of you have been blessed with a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps and working with others? How many of you know how your sobriety was accomplished? We're not qualified to talk about how. All we're qualified to talk about is who. And it wasn't me. So I don't want to talk to them about the who until they ask me. Right? I want them to understand I'm every bit as hopeless as they felt, but I'm no longer chained to that. And when they'll ask me, how did I do it, and they're ready to hear it, then I can tell them I didn't do it. Right? Take away my difficulties, a victory over them may bear witness. My obligation is to wait till they ask, and then I'm going to demonstrate that my difficulties. I'm going to honor my third step. I got to know, how did you stay sober today? Got no earthly idea. I just know who did it. Okay? So if he's in serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquor has caused you, being careful not to moralize or lecture. If his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. Get him to tell some of his. How many of you got here tore up enough there wasn't nothing funny? So sometimes we all think we're just supposed to, we're not a glum lot and they all want to tell jokes, and that freaks us out when we get here tore up from the floor up and there ain't nothing funny. So what we may want is someone to take a little time to realize, I'm not in on the joke. Like, I think I am the joke. So if his mood is light, then get him to tell some of his. But we are supposed to be weighing and measure in the spirit what's going on at this point. Why the hell did I awaken first before I did this? So I could awaken to the spirit so I could help carry his burdens, not add on. Right? Okay. All right, so when he sees you know all about the drinking game, commence to describe yourself as an alcoholic. Tell him how baffled you were and how you finally learned that you were sick. So how many of you finally learned that you were sick, and how did you do that? I went to detox. How many of you, we asked this earlier, how many of you struggle with the idea you were sick or if you just were behaving badly? Because a lot of people don't believe addiction to be mental illness. In fact, a lot of people don't believe mental illness to be mental illness. That's why they yell at us for behaving exactly the way mentally ill people behave. Who's mentally ill here? Right? We behave fucking weird, man. I get it. I know exactly what I'm seeing. Ha ha, that's one of ours. Right? Yeah. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. Show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink of the spree. We suggest you do this as we have done it in the chapter on alcoholism. So they wrote a chapter more about alcoholism so that we could find ourselves and learn to tell our story, armed with the facts about ourselves. Right? So I don't know what the weird twist is that led to a spree for you, but in there they talk about Jim, right? The car guy. You guys relate to the car guy, even if you don't relate to pouring whiskey and milk? Okay. So whatever. Yeah. So he knew himself to be an alcoholic. He had lost his business as a result of his alcoholism, and he had to go to work for the business he once owned. Any of you ever had to take a lesser job as a result of your addictive escapades? Some of you, 50 cents an hour, right? 40 cents. So we get it. So Jim's on his way to this car dealership he once owned, and on his way he's a little agitated. So when he gets to work, he has a few words with the boss. Nothing serious. How many of you have been a little agitated about your having to go to work? And when you got to work, you had a few words with the boss. Nothing serious. So that's what happened to Jim, and then his strategy was, rather than stay at the dealership where people come to buy cars, he was going to go out in the woods looking for people to buy cars. So is it making any sense to you? How many of you went to the dope house just to show the fellas how good you were doing? Stayed for the parade. Okay. So that's all that happened, and he ordered, and he wasn't going to drink. You know, all this stuff. He gets to this roadside place. He orders a sandwich and milk, and then the thought crosses his mind. Couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. So that was the twist for Jim, and then the experiment worked so well, he had another and another and another, and then he went back to the asylum. So the other guy, what's the guy's name? Can't think. Fred. Fred, perfectly normal in every respect. And the AA's got a hold of him, and they said, this is what happened to us. And he goes, well, thank God you got to me before I got that bad. So he didn't pick up no matter what. That was his. Any of you ever tried that plan? I don't pick up no matter what. That was Fred's plan. And it went so well that he was off on a trip to New York, and everything was going well, and he walked through a bar room and thought, couldn't hurt if I had a few highballs with dinner, and he woke up 3 days later in a cab. Any of you ever find out you were a will not after you thought you were, or a cannot after you thought you were a will not, whatever? That's what happened to Fred. And then they talk about the jaywalker, if you don't want to personalize it, who kept going out and trying A little controlled drinking until he was just battered to... Okay. So those of you who are relating through your laughter, congratulations, you just caught alcoholism. So we're determining who you are. So you might want to read the rest of the fucking book. So if you're satisfied that he's a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. What is the hopeless feature of the malady? Yeah, no matter what I think or desperately what I want to try and do, I cannot bring to consciousness with sufficient force the memory of suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. And at some point, I'm without defense against the first drink, and then I'm off. Okay. All right. So it says, if you're satisfied he's a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental conditions surrounding that first drink prevents normal functioning of the willpower. So what's that look like for you? How many of you had clean time and really weren't even thinking about it, but maybe you're working with people and they were going to have a few drinks and it was a rough week. They said, it's a rough week. We're going to go let off a little steam. You think, I had a rough week too. I want to let off a little steam. Why can't I let off a little steam? Any of you ever done that? Did you find out? Because they went home and I went and lived under a bush. That's why I can't. Oh, no, I know it's true. Anyway, so don't at this stage refer to this book unless he's seen it and wishes to discuss it, and be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusion. What difference does it make, my opinion, about your alcoholic condition? Absolutely none. How many of you had an opinion from a paid medical professional about your condition? How well did that work for you? Yeah. And we meet them in a room, we think my opinion is going to be valuable to them. I give a fuck about your experience, dude. When are you going to quit talking? Right? Come on, how many of you have been lectured to by some evangelical alcoholic? I think hell looks something like that. When we ain't ready, we do not want that lecture. Right? Okay. So let him draw his own conclusion. If he sticks to the idea he can still control his drinking, tell him possibly he can, if he's not too alcoholic. Any of you ever wanted to be told you weren't alcoholic enough? No matter how bad we think the condition, none of us wants to be told we're not bad enough. Wait, I got another story. Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. Why is it that I'm so emphatic about that? Because I know they don't believe it. And if they don't understand that I've been restored from an illness, a fatal malady, through which there was no return through human aid, if they don't get that, then they're not going to ask the important question, how'd you do it? And get the important answer, I didn't. But the one who did sent me to you. Talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. What are those?
Physical cravings, once I drink, obsession, I can't stay away from it.
And you guys get that when you put the chemical, whatever it is in your body, that abnormal reaction, the doctor calls it an allergy, but an allergy is an abnormal reaction. So if no one's ever explained to you what happens to an alcoholic, they put alcohol in their body and they find themselves energized by that. Is that true for any of you? Well, see, it's a sedative. And so it's confusing. And then the condition of mind is what we already talked about. I can't bring to consciousness, bring to my awareness with sufficient force the memory of suffering and humiliation. And I do it again. Temporary relief, knowing it's a lifetime of suffering. Knowing. We used to hear people in the room say, It's doing the same thing, expecting a different result. That is not what the book says. It says it's a lack of proportion, the inability to think clearly. Right? The reason that matters is I had no expectation of a different result in my addiction. This is going to suck. Watch. Know what I'm saying? Okay, so keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. Why? Because I don't have an opinion for them. I only have my experience. And if you think mine aligns with yours, you may want to walk with me just a minute. And if not, that's cool. So explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it'll serve some good purpose, but you may talk to them about the hopelessness of alcoholism because you offer a solution. Do you understand the solution we offer? Because, yeah, it's power, because if I can't, if lack of power is my dilemma, the only solution to that dilemma is power. So it ain't a process, and it ain't a fucking meeting. It's not a doorknob or a light bulb or any of the nonsense we've heard over the years. It's not a group of drunks. It's power from within, a religious idea and a practical program of action. God dwells in you. He sent me to you. The reason you can feel me is because you already possess the power I'm speaking to you of. You'll soon have your friend admitting that he has many, if not all, the traits of an alcoholic, and if his own doctor is willing to tell him that he's an alcoholic, so much the better. Even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he's become very curious to know how you got well. Now they're leading me up to it, right? Let him ask you that question, if he will. Now this is where you're going to have to practice. Pray, meditate, pray, pause when agitated or doubtful. Because what if they don't ask the question?
Don't talk about it.
They're not ready. They're not ready to hear it. And then, when he does, in italics, tell him exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual feature freely. How many of you have been told exactly and felt something you didn't know what you were feeling and had the dignity of someone saying, that is the power we call God? It's real, right? Okay. If the man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. That's in italics. Why? God is not a concept. I have concepts. God has tangible realities. The great reality dwells within me, so my concept can only block me. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I'm not talking to you about my idea of God. I'm talking to you about God's idea for you, which is found within you, which is why I was sent to you, because I'm here to offer you the same redemption that was granted me. Not that I have the power to do it, but I carry the power with me that will do it. Or we would not have had an encounter. And the bad news about that is if you run into me, God doesn't send me out to treat hangnails. Y'all might be a little sicker than you think. Just a guess. Okay. So he can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him, so don't get silly. If you want to believe that the person you encounter believes, that's enough. And then just walk with them, and they'll point you to the power, because we would teach you to talk to you about the power we call God without giving you a demonstration of the power. But don't believe the nonsense that it's a group of drunks or a light bulb or a door. That's people that didn't read the book. They just talk in nonsense. It's not a God of my understanding, because I'm not we. Who's we? The first 100. So it's God as they understood him, not as we understand him. Not anyone that came after the first 100 is qualified to say a God of my understanding. And we've been deceived for years about that. God as they understood him was the wind like a cool mountaintop blowing through and through Bill. It was a powerful spiritual experience when he thought about going to war and surviving war and then being in the graveyard later, and the real significance of being in the cathedral burst upon him and it made him swallow hard. Right? That's how Bill understood him, the famous agnostic. He understood him to be a tangible experience and a very unreal illusion of life. Okay. So he can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. The main thing is he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself and that he live by spiritual principles. God dwells in you. That's why we're together. Practical program of action will prove the power to you through you. You want it or not?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So I'm going to jump over to 94. And it says, outline the program of action explaining how you made a self-appraisal. So there's no rules here, but if you've never made a self-appraisal, you'll probably have a hard time explaining how you did it. So people say, you don't have to take the steps in order. No, you don't have to do anything. But if you'd like to be uniquely useful, you'll need to be properly armed with the facts about yourself. We do that in step 4. We look at the calamities, pomps, and worships, which have obscured our consciousness of the power within us. And by that, I know what happened, right? I know what I was like. I was selfish. I was dishonest. I was full of guilt, shame, remorse. And I had this encounter with power, and I was taken through a process where I set an ideal for my future relationships. And in that process, I learned that I had always wanted to be better than I was, but fear had blocked me from becoming better than I was. And so I started learning how to do that, and pretty soon, the more I bore witness, another book tells us by the blood of the Lamb and the word of my testimony. If we're gonna defeat mental illness, spiritual maladies, we're gonna have to continue to bear witness to the redemption we're walking in. How you straightened out your past and why you're now endeavoring to be helpful to him. So how did I straighten out my past? I made amends, the biggest amends of which is the fact that I'm talking to him, and I'm using that what I thought waste, as an experience, a tool of healing for others. Yeah? Okay? So it's important for him to realize that your attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital role in your recovery. Why would that be? They gave us the answer on the first page. Nothing so much ensures immunity as intensive work with others. Something about the one-on-one connection, bearing witness to you about what I was like, what happened, and what I'm obviously like now because I'm here. How many of you lived a life where you really didn't care if people were suffering as long as you had yours? Right. Most of us, right? And all of a sudden, we're going out and we're bearing witness to people. How many of you have given up your pleasures to go help somebody because you knew what it felt like to be in that jam? And how did you feel about it? Freaking free, right? Okay. So actually, he may be helping you more than you're helping him. Make it plain he's under no obligation to you, that you hope only that he will try and help other alcoholics when he escapes his own difficulties. Why do I hope that for him? Because if he doesn't, he'll suffer. He may not relapse, but he'll suffer. If you do not use your experience to help others, it will always remain a waste to you. You'll never confront your old ideas. Cleaning house doesn't happen in 4, folks. Cleaning house happens in 12. Make it clear he's not, suggest how important it is he placed the welfare of other people ahead of his own. Make it clear he's not under pressure, that he needn't see you again if he doesn't want to. Now they got a little message for you that are working with people. You should not be offended if he wants to call it off, or he's helped you more than you've helped him. How many of you have worked with enough where you've had that experience? I just want to let you know, I've found another sponsor. And I'm not talking about the ones that you were praying for that. I'm talking about the ones you spent a lot of time in and invested in them, and you're thinking, you couldn't have told me that before the last 3 fucking weeks of sitting there listening to your drivel. I hope it works out for you. So they're showing us our old ideas, that this selfless act, I thought I was engaged in, I was attached to the outcome, right? Okay. So then it says if your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you've perhaps made a friend. Notice how they separated the idea of human understanding from God as we understood him. Because that's always in past tense, it's always in italics. The God I understood then is not the God I understand today, because it's been a growing consciousness of experience. And I didn't receive human understanding through that process. I received divine understanding through that process. Make sense? Because that's not based on the five senses, that's based on the vital sixth sense. Okay. All right, so maybe you've disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. How many of you have been disturbed? Everyone's laughing. So all of us at one time or another has been disturbed about the question of addiction. I'm glad to hear what you had to say. I'm glad I'm not that bad yet. Perhaps on my next case we could talk further. This is all to the good. The more hopeless he feels, the better. He'll be more likely to follow your suggestions. Your candidate may give reasons why he need not follow all the program. Now that's a rare event, I bet, right? The first thing you guys need to get, because you're going to be better armed than many people in the fellowship's not the program. And we don't do people the dignity of telling them the difference, and people pretend like it doesn't make a difference. It absolutely makes a difference that they know there's a program of recovery and then there's a fellowship, and the fellowship is not always aligned with the program in any way. It can be very deceptive. The program of recovery is described in this book and nowhere else. The fellowship was named after this book, not the other way around. So when people tell you they're in the program, you'll have to have them show you the page. Not to be an ass, but so people don't die needlessly because they never got introduced to power. Okay. So he may rebel at the thought of a drastic house cleaning, which requires discussion with other people. How many of you have rebelled at such an idea? So all of us have rebelled in some way or another, right? Okay. So what do they say? Do not contradict such views. Now you're going to grow in consciousness. They're telling us stuff based on the shit they did wrong. That's how you write how-to books. You write down all the shit you learned by all the mistakes you made. That's why they tell you our program is meant to be suggestive only. Because although humans can learn from the experience of other humans, we are very reluctant to do so. So, do not contradict such views. Tell him you once felt as he does, but you doubt whether you had made much progress had you not taken action. Is that true for most of you? So that's the truth. I don't need to give him a bunch of bullshit about whatever I'm like now or whatever I'd like you to think I'm like now. Look, man, I get you. You're afraid. You don't want to take a look at who you've been. You're afraid I won't like you when you tell me who you've been. I said, but the good thing for you to know is, number one, if it has a name, you didn't invent it. All of us came here with a past. And I don't need to know who you think you are, because the one who knows who you are and whose you are sent me to get you. Right? On your first visit, tell them about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I want to tell them about the fellowship, but I have not yet shown them the book, which is the program. If he shows an interest, then lend him a copy of your book. And guess what? How many of you got a copy of the book, and then someone showed you how to read it, and you found out, although you thought you could read, you could never read this book until someone showed you how? We learned that something about this power has to be imparted human to human, and we have to. I'm not here to tell you what the book says. The author will inform you what the book says to you, but I am here to show you what it says to me and share an experience with you. That's what it means to share my experience, my strength, and my hope. Right? Okay. Unless your friend wants to talk farther about himself, do not wear out your welcome. Give him a chance to think it over. If you do stay, let him steer the conversation in any direction he likes. Sometimes a new man is anxious to proceed at once, and you may be tempted to let him do so. Have you ever done that? Man, I got one. He's just on fire. You know what I'm talking about? And we don't know whether we're dealing with the people pleaser or what we got going on, but we're not doing him any service if we haven't given him a thought, because I'm talking about giving my life to a power I just met. And I've got clear instruction on what that looks like, but I'm entitled, if I'm going to move into a conscious relationship, to have time to examine that decision with my conscious awareness, my awareness of being aware, some time alone. So I don't want to move so fast because I'm not the one moving them anyway. Right? Okay. So this is sometimes a mistake. If he has trouble later, he's likely to say you rushed him. And if you've sponsored very many, I guarantee at some point it will be your fault. That's the way it goes. They're all assholes, aren't they, Sean? You'll be most successful with alcoholics if I'm talking about all the sponsors, not all the sponsors. All sponsors are assholes. Know that right up front. How many sponsors we got in the room? There you go. That's a bucket of assholes if I ever saw it. Okay. All right. So never talk down to an alcoholic from a moral or spiritual hilltop. Simply lay out the kit of spiritual tools for his inspection. Why? Yep. I'm going to honestly want to, willing to make the effort. I explain it to you clearly so you can examine it with your logical senses, and then you'll either pick it up or you won't. Okay? Show him how they worked with you. Offer him friendship and fellowship, and tell him if he wants to get well, you'll do anything to help. I love that promise. How many of you have heard from people, you never have to feel this way again if you don't want to? How many of you determined that was a lie? Fuck, I'm going to feel worse, man. I've been doing heroin for like weeks. I'm going to be sick for months. What do you mean I don't have to feel this way again if I don't want to? But if you want to get well, I'll do anything I can to help you. If that's followed up by action, that's a real promise. Because that's our obligation in the power, is to help them carry their burdens. You don't have to carry that burden alone. Come with me, I'll help you. Okay. All right, so if he's not interested in your solution, if he expects you to act only as a banker for his financial difficulties or a nurse for his sprees, you may have to drop him until he changes his mind. This he may do after he gets hurt some more. So that's where the idea of firing people came. Notice how they didn't say fire them. You know why we don't fire them? Because we didn't hire them. But if my continuing to carry them is doing them more harm, then I have to detach from it. That has more to do with firing me than firing them.
Get out of God's way.
That's right. Exactly. If I think I'm so powerful that I can invoke their recovery, I've missed the point. Why did I admit to powerlessness? Right? Okay, so if he's sincerely interested and wants to see you again, ask him to read this book in the interval. After doing that, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. He should not be pushed or prodded by you, his wife, or his friends. If he's to find God, the desire must come from within. Okay, so I'm going to go over, just in interest of saving time, to page 96. Page 96 tells us a little bit about the experience of starting our active life of service, working with others. It says, do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. How many of you had numerous people work with you, and some of those were just sowing seeds for a future experience? Right? So you don't know what season they're in or the season you're in. So I always tell the new ones, well, I never get them past. Well, that's okay. You don't ever get them past any step. God does that. But But when you're new to this and you're learning to allow people to have their experience, what we call them is tackling dummies. They're going to get all beat up. You'll visit them at the hospital. You'll show compassion. It'll be good. How many of you were a tackling dummy for a while? A few trips to the hospital, insane asylums, jails. Anybody? I'm the only motherfucker who went to all those places. And I don't mean visiting. I found myself there. Yep, that's me. Okay. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You're sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. So they're telling me a clue. When I talk to them about the solution, the experience they're having and what that solution is, that power of the Spirit they're feeling, then they're going to be gravitating toward that Spirit. And if they're not, if they're thinking this is an intellectual exercise, then they may need to sit on it a minute. Because they will go home and remember the experience they had in your presence. And they won't remember a damn thing you said. It's just true. Okay, so we find it a waste of time to keep chasing a man who cannot or will not work with you. If you leave such a person alone, he may soon become convinced that he cannot recover by himself. To spend too much time on any one situation is to deny some other alcoholic an opportunity to live and be happy. Do we have the right to deny someone else an opportunity to live and be happy? No, and the gravity of that is in the next sentence. One of our fellowship failed entirely with his first half dozen prospects. You know who they're talking about? Talking about Bill Wilson. All the millions who have recovered since his first half dozen would have been deprived had he not detached from the outcome of that. It's real important to internalize, right? The gravity of the effect. You're going to affect generations as a result of your decision to carry this message. Okay? So he often says if he had continued to work on them, he might have deprived many others who have since recovered of their chance. Suppose you are now making your second visit to a man. He's read this volume. He says he's prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. See how careful they were to explain that to us? Tell them about our fellowship. Now you've looked at our program. Now we've talked, and you've consciously decided based on the experience we shared that you are ready to go through with the program of recovery. See how we owe people that dignity? How many of you got here for years and thought the program was sitting in the rooms? I want to become a duck. I'm going to sit in a pond. Right? I want to become a car. I'm going to sit in a garage. If I want to be a recovered alcoholic, here are the steps we took. It got nothing to do with 90 of nothing. Just trying to help people see how silly we have become in our fellowship. And people die as a result of our silliness. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical experience. Advice, it says. Let him know you are available if he wishes to make a decision and tell his story, but do not insist on it if he prefers to consult someone else. I'm going to jump over to now page 97. First paragraph, it says, never avoid these responsibilities. They talked about taking them into your home or whatever you might have to do to help get them started, okay? But be sure you're doing the right thing if you assume them. So at this point, what is the goal of 12-step recovery? Yeah, to awaken, not to remain abstinent. Right. Otherwise, it would have said having become abstinent as a result of these steps. When you awaken spiritually, a byproduct of that is a reduction in the need for synthetic spirits. If you're doing your work right, you don't need synthetic spirits because you're working on divine energies. Right? So we're talking about why would I replace synthetics with synthetics, this spiritual inebriation that flows when I'm doing God's work. Okay? So helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. So how important are they to me? There's another book that he tells you, he sets them on the right and the left, and he says, whatever you do for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you're doing to me. So who's the stone in our foundation? The least of these. Right? Because they're brothers and sisters. Huh? Some of you recognize that from another book. We got to go to the other book because it's the foundational text of this book. Okay? Okay, so a kindly act once in a while isn't enough. You have to act the Good Samaritan every day if need be. So some of you have read that other book. You know about that Good Samaritan. He stops and helps people that he shouldn't be helping because a Samaritan shouldn't be stopping to help a Jew. Right? But the Jew got beat up. Us Samaritans, we know a little bit about being beat up. So he stops, he bandages the wounds, he takes him to the inn, he pays his tab. He was his brother's keeper in spite of tribal boundaries, right? Tribal meaning the way we think. Okay. It may mean the loss of many nights' sleep, great interference with your pleasures, interruptions to your business. It may mean sharing your money or your home, counseling frantic wives and relatives, innumerable trips to police courts, sanitariums, hospitals, jails, and asylums. See how that's the big amends? How many of you were in countless police courts, jails, and asylums, and someone you don't remember anymore came to visit you? So they were engaging in the great amends that they prepared for in 9 by carrying that message to you. Right? Okay? Your telephone may jangle at any time of the day or night. Your wife may sometimes say she's neglected.
Don't have one of those anymore.
Because you neglected her. No. How many of you have had a significant other complain to you because you're always going out and doing your AA stuff? Sometimes that happens. I mean, we're not suggesting you ignore them, but the fact is that's part of the promise, right? I was told that these were the 12-step promises by the asshole who sponsored me. A drunk may smash the furniture in your home or burn a mattress. You may have to fight with him if he's violent. Sometimes you'll have to call a doctor and administer sedatives under his direction. Another time you may have to send for the police or an ambulance. Occasionally you'll have to meet such conditions. So in 3, they told me I had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what I need. If I kept close to him, performed his work well. They just gave me a description on how to perform his work well. I'm going to have to go to innumerable jails, asylums, hospitals. I may have to get up in the middle of the night. I may have interruptions to my pleasures. It may cause a disruption in my family. But it's a debt I owe that I can never repay. Okay. So we seldom allow an alcoholic to live in our homes for a long time. It's not good for him, and it sometimes creates serious complications in the family. Though an alcoholic does not respond, there's no reason why you should neglect the family. You should continue to be friendly to them. The family should be offered your way of life. So we've kind of missed that in the modern fellowship because we meet them in fellowship, but there's great suffering in the home, often because of a spirit of grievance about the behavior of the sick individual, and they have not had it explained to them that the individual is sick, and I was once as sick as they are, but I'm here to tell you I wouldn't be here if there wasn't hope for your significant other. Okay, just wanted to, for some reason, the Spirit wanted you to know that today. We go past it. So I'm going to go to 98. First paragraph, it says, it's not the matter of giving that's in question, but when and how to give. Remember last week, if you were here for 10 and 11, they said it's time to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And I said understanding of what, effectiveness at what. And we sort of tried to guess because we didn't know. Well, the book's all inclusive. They never ask a question they don't give the answer to. They mean the words they say the words they mean. So what I'm growing in effectiveness of is when and how to give. Sometimes what I give would be harmful. Sometimes what I give is necessary kindness. And sometimes what I'm giving is not what they're asking for. Does that make sense? Okay. That often makes the difference between failure and success. The minute we put our work on a service plane, the alcoholic commences to rely on our assistance rather than upon God. That's where they're telling us that I would cheat them to talk to them about God without giving them a demonstration. So what I need to tell them is, we can show you kindness, but what we really need you to do is focus inward. There's a reason I'm here talking to you. There's a power that's going to deliver you. It's not me. Temporary comforts aren't going to, right? Okay. So he clamors for this or that, claiming he cannot master alcohol until his material needs are cared for. Nonsense. Right? Because our lived experience is that we conquer all kinds of things in him who strengthens us. Yes? Some of us have taken very hard knocks to learn this truth. Job or no job? How many of you had no job? Still got high. Wife or no wife? How many of you were in or out of a relationship? Still got high. So none of those things are conditioned. My sobriety is not conditioned on any of those things. Right? I know this. They know it at some level. Right? Okay, because our message has to have depth and weight. And the deepest of messages is always truth. Not about anything about what they're doing, about whose they are. Yeah? Okay. So we simply do not stop drinking so long as we place dependence upon other people ahead of dependence upon God. And the reason I set all that up is the next paragraph. Burn into the idea, into the consciousness of every man that he can get well regardless of anyone. So the only way I'm going to burn something into someone's consciousness is I'm going to have to transmit power, depth and weight. And we're not talking about some intellectual stimulation. I'm talking about blow me back. I got to know more. What'd you say? Right? Okay. The only condition that he trusts God and clean house. And if that they don't understand, then we're trusting in power. We got a step for coming to believe in power, and then you'll learn what to call the power once you've had your encounter. Yes? Okay? I'm going to go from there, because I'm going to run out of time here in just a minute. I'm going to jump over to, I'm going to go to page 100. Some of you may have studied this book a lot, and some of you may not have ever had explained to you what I'm about to explain to you about what these people discovered. But on page 100 it says, both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. How many of you reading that are thinking they're talking about always have a wet one working with? I've heard that said. People think it's always have a new one. How many of you have learned that there's a new man or a woman within you that behaves better than you sometimes? Have you ever been surprised on how you're behaving as opposed to how you used to behave? Have you ever got a glimpse on how you're behaving based on even on how you're thinking in the moment? So that new man, that new woman that we walk with every day consciously dwells within us. The great reality. Does that make sense? And that's why we must walk with them, because that means in my awakened state, I'm awakened to my spiritual body, and it's informed with understanding. Yes? Okay. If you persist, remarkable things will follow. Some of you are students of that other book. Signs and wonders follow us. Does that make sense, what they're talking about? Okay. You may not believe me, but they studied that other book for 4 years before they wrote this one. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. So I'm going to land this plane right here. I came up out of the gutter, out of the bush, homeless, and I encountered this power, and although I had the DTs and was very, very sick from opiates for weeks and months, I instantly thought differently. My body wouldn't quit shaking. I couldn't even write my own inventory. But I presently lived in a new and wonderful world, and my circumstance did not change, not for days, for months and years. And yet, I'm standing here today following the dictates of said higher power, and you're sitting in his house. Thank you. See you next week.